just a breakdown. What does that really look like, Mr. Williams? Because during the time that the office was closed there, Councilwoman Diaz, I know that you can relate to it because I'm sure your office were receiving a gazillion phone calls from residents. What does this mean as it relates to making sure that we have adequate staff on board to be able to address some of these concerns? Earlier, you had a resident, Section 8 resident, Mr. Johnson, who spoke about deferred payment. We're all going to receive a whole lot of phone calls about this because there are going to be a lot of people that's going to need help. I'm just trying to figure out, I know that these dollars will help support our executive office and team like that, but how do we filter these dollars down to get in our communities where people really need to be?
That's
We're going to
right.
have we got a lot of issues
That's
going
right.
on. And no, I'm not hearing that from anybody that's against the care.
So, Commissioner Weekly, that's included in my executive director's report. In the board package, the commissioners receive to insert the documents. Yeah, you have the colored SNRHA's CARES Act funding priorities, which is directly derived from eligible activities that HUD put in its notices, and I will explain that. And then there are there's maybe about 40 some waivers, and I'm just going to highlight two of those, which will hopefully address some of your concerns. But I think the color-coded Excel spreadsheet that I will go over will answer your concerns, hopefully.
Okay, but Mr. Chair, back to item 11, I can support it. I can support the item, but I just think that we need to have a really good breakdown of what the dollars going to be spent on, and specifically how is it COVID related? Because again, from your local municipality, we also too are right in some of the same thing because we're addressing some of the same constituents.
Go to rent money.
No, you're absolutely right. And it really, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just seeing from this report, based on what Mr. Williams just said, to the one that he's going to give next in his executive director's report, there is just so much redundancy that I think that if we're not careful, we're going to get things done from the federal government standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, proper and appropriate utilization of the funds for the benefit of the residents is priority, but then the accounting or documentation component to make sure that it is an appropriate fund and that it's all accounted for. I think being able to see the utilization of these funds going forward and how they do apply, how they're being utilized is definitely key for us to do the right thing to get the services and help to the residents, but also to not cause ourselves trouble going down the road. So the dual purpose, I absolutely agree with you.
Well, hell,
Any other comments from the board regarding item number 11? We have another question from Councilwoman Diaz, and then I'll one more chance for the folks that are on the video.
So, Mr. Williams, just in hearing Commissioner Weekly's questions and comments, it just made me think to ask, how are we vetting the expenditures of the COVID monies? Are we leaning in on our legal team, then with our subject matter experts to see that we are going to use the monies as they should be utilized that are COVID related? Or what's the vetting process to make sure that we are channeling the funds in ways that the government will approve?
Yeah, so HUD issued two notices, one for public housing fund and one for HCV fees. And in those notices, they had eligible activity expenses that could be used for the $3.7 million that we received. In the board package, the staff, we break down the funding priorities based on those tasks. The task column gives the eligible activity, and then that activity cost gives how we're going to use the funding for that activity. We are still working on a budget for that. We was hoping to get that to you soon, and that will break down how those costs will be expended. As for the vetting process, because we're taking those tasks and those activities out directly from the federal notices and using that as a guide, not steering away from that, we also have to go through a normal contracting procurement process for that. And so that vetting process of the federal regulations, of the notices, procurement process, it would be a normal activity if we hadn't even received this funds, and using it as similar to our federal funds that we already received.
Thank you. Are there other questions from commissioners? Comments? All right, we'll open it to the public for comment.
Beatrice Turner. Now they putting this money out that folks can get. But do you know who really suffered through all this from when they shut down in March? It was residents that suffered because they couldn't get work orders did, you couldn't get different stuff did. Until now, since they done reopened. Hell, the damn employees didn't hurt for a goddamn thing. It was the residents who damn heard it.
Any other public comment?
Yeah, I wouldn't, is this one just on the monies for the
This public comment is relative to item number 11, which is the
COVID? Is that what, I'm
yes,
sorry.
correct.
Okay, so, when you guys was out, when you just abandoned us basically because we didn't get no notice or anything, we had people living on our roof, we had no security, we had, and when we did have security, it was only part-time because I walked the property, I looked for him, I called him, I said, is there security on site? He said, yes. I said, okay, where is he? Because I'm looking for him, been looking for him for the last hour. He said, oh, he's at lunch with me right now. I said, I just asked you if he was on site.
So really quick, Phyllis, I apologize. This is really specifically dealing with raising the low rent management fee from $64 to $80
Okay.
between now and December 31st. That's the item before us right now.
Okay.
It's also, excuse me, you
It's
know,
the my
anywhere they can
understanding.
get a dime on the back of the resident.
Excuse me, yes, Annette Walker. It's also, to my understanding, is that significant amount of money that they said it was going to be from the COVID-19. Is that something we can use to be able to help with the rent for
No,
people?
so these dollars here it's an allocation to the central office cost center, the support function within the agency to support all the departments, the services that the central office provides. This is an increase in the revenue that they have on hand to address specific COVID-19 related impacts and costs associated with that to be able to operate our organization. So it has nothing to do with rent. This is exclusively dollars that are being temporarily raised and utilized for supporting our operations from impacts of COVID-19. So
Okay, as a resident, I just really want to say that no matter how many calls it seemed like you make that to the executive office, they never return your phone call. And so will that impact a better response to the residents when they're trying to get in touch with the executive office? Will that impact that increase?
well, we're operational, and so services should be at a level that, we're always needing to improve, trying to improve. These are unique circumstances, but to answer your question, if you call today, someone's gonna answer the phone, because the agency...
But I'm saying, it's about returning the phone calls.
Okay.
Will this increase?
The expectation is when someone calls you, you return a call, so I would say yes, that calls would be returned, yes.
Okay, well then we're in favor of the increase then.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Okay, any other public comment?
John Johnson, 3710 Florida Avenue, Las Vegas, Nevada. I just have a question because, I'm not familiar with all these terminologies and everything. But this central office cost center, is this center operated by the agency? Is this like a sub-department or something? Because from the way I'm reading it, basically,
John, the central office is really a definition of departments within the agency
Agent.
that support the
Agency.
the
So
operation that we, so accounting, finance, IT, administrative staff, all that, the cost of that is divvied up among the entire organization, and everybody pays a part. So housing choice voucher or housing programs don't have to do their own accounting, don't have to do their own
exactly.
IT. It's a way to be efficient and centralized in those universal functions.
So my understanding of what's going on is probably correct. So basically, an entity of the organization is receiving $1.8 million, whatever it is. Another agency within the organization, which is the COCC, they're billing this department to take up the $1.8 million. So then in turn, it's going to go into the COCC's fund. So therefore, by definition of by HUD concern, you guys spent the money because this other agency billed you guys and you guys paid that administration fee or whatever that cost you were saying of the 65. Is that about what's going on?
Correct. The COC is bills for service, for the services they provide to the agency as a whole, and it's a fixed amount where we have an increase in dollars available due to COVID to address COVID-related issues. That's the 1.8 million. The regulations allow us to take or bill a percentage of that, not entirely, but up to 25%. That's the differential between the $64 and the $80 for a finite period of time till the end of the year to give us the wherewithal to address things. And as has been stated before by our commissioners, we need to do this, and Mr. Williams as well. It's not looking for things to spend the money on and being creative. It's following the guidelines, the appropriate expenditures that are relative to this pandemic that we're dealing with in our organization and in our community. And those are the parameters in which we live. These expenditures, we're not just looking for things to spend money on. We are spending money on things that are approved by the federal government through the guidelines that we've received to help our organization be successful during these trying times. Safe, effective, successful. So.
And that's why we're going to say, once the money goes into the COO, once you guys spend that money, he'll develop a budget, and like you said, it's going for
it'll all be documented, yes, it'll all be accounted for.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, totally understand.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. All right, any other public comment regarding this item? Number 11? How you doing, sir?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Dillard Scott, 4349 6th Street. I just wanted to say, because I was reading the line item here and it says for situations that were directly affected by COVID. So is this a one-time deal that you'll get this money? Because this was for May.
No, it's a one-time expenditure between now and December 31st.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the money has already been obtained, because I know personally during this time period, myself and a group of other community activists went over and cleaned up Sherman Gardens because it was deplorable. And so as far as using this money for PPE equipment or whatever to prevent and make sure that if it was directly affected, we didn't have a maintenance staff available to us. So we need to know what this money is going to be spent on, because I can tell you what it was not spent on. And if it's not going to be spent on anything where it was directly affected, as this says, it does need to be returned. So I am not in favor of it, or it needs to be held in abeyance until an accounting can be done of how it was directly affected, because that's what it's saying. And there was no direct affected, no one was directly affected. You guys weren't operating, so you should return the money. If you're not going to return the money, we need an accounting, and it should be held in abeyance.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. All right, we'll close the public comment, and I'll turn it to the board for any final comments and a motion.
This is Tick. I move for approval.
Is there a second? A second. We have a motion by Commissioner Segerbloom and a second by Commissioner Sharon Davis. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Please state your name. That motion passes. Thank you so much. Move to item number 12, approval to increase executive director contract signing and budget allocating authority from $150,000 to the HUD allowed limit of $250,000. Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chairperson, currently the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority's micro purchase threshold is set at $10,000, which remains the same. SNRHA current small purchase, aka simplified acquisition threshold is set at $150,000. which requires a sealed bid process and the Board of Commissioners approval if over this amount. The current HUD regulations for small purchase threshold is $250,000. Action that is being requested is to approve the increase of the executive director's signing authority to match that of the HUD dollar limit of $250,000. Mr. Chairperson, I'd like to request that the board amend this action item to include language that temporarily approves this increase of $250,000 till the end of December 31st, and that those actions for this increase only be allowable for COVID-related HUD regulatory activities.
All right, thank you, Mr. Williams. I'll turn it over to the board for questions or comments. Anyone from the board have something they'd like to say regarding item number 12, this temporary increase?
This is Tick. Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I initially questioned this, but and thinking about it, because we have to spend these monies by the end of the year, to wait every month before have it come before us and try to approve stuff, I think is unrealistic. So this is just related to the COVID monies. We'll get an accounting afterwards, but I think it's important that we give the executive director the flexibility to spend the monies because we don't have anything, leave anything on the table.
Thank you, Commissioner Segerblum. Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, Weekly.
Yes, sir, Mr. Weekly.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. Williams, the executive director. Repeated calls answering a number of questions that I had in reference to this item as well. I think one thing, Mr. Williams, we talked about was just transparency. Just making sure, because I'm sure you're going to do it in here, but making sure that anything that does get close to that 250,000 number, that the board as well as the public will be aware of the spending. And so I just want to put that on the record here as it relates to us keeping the transparency in place.
Agreed. My apologies. I would like to add that as part of the amendment to this item.
Thank you, Commissioner Weekly. Any other comments from board members? Okay, we'll open it to the public for any comments relating to this raising of the HUD allowable amount from 150 to 250 on a temporary basis relative to COVID-19 expenditures to streamline the process and with the transparency, documentation, and accounting to be outlaid in a clear and available fashion.
On a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis. No comment from the public. We'll close that, and I'll turn it over to the board for a motion.
This is Tick. Approve,
please.
We have a motion from Commissioner Segerblum. Is there a second?
I second. Sharon Davis.
We have a second from Commissioner Sharon Davis. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please state your name. That motion.
Cheryl Davis.
Cheryl Davis is a nay vote?
Right.
Okay, thank you. We documented that. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Cheryl Davis. So that motion passes with one dissenting vote. We will go to section 5, business items, and we'll turn the time over to our executive director for his report for item number 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. As we all know, the entire nation has experienced an unprecedented event in which it hasn't seen in our economy, health-wise, and impact in how every housing authority delivers services to their individual communities. Here in Southern Nevada, on March 18th, we transitioned into a partial shutdown. That happened the day before the governor announced his state of emergency or stay-at-home order. Between March 18th and until we reopened on Monday, April 27th, unfortunately, the only services that we could provide were emergency, critical, and health and safety work orders on our public and affordable housing property sites. We were limited on our HCV side, only addressing domestic violence and emergency move situations in our HCV department. And that was limited by a couple of factors. One is that our agency, like other agencies, wasn't prepared for this. We didn't have the personal protective equipment for our staff so that they could be protected. We actually didn't receive that personal protective equipment until the weekend before we reopened. Another factor, which is sometimes challenging for the public and officials who supervise this agency, is that a lot of the HUD regulations require face-to-face interaction. We had HUD issued some waivers on April 3rd. There were questions the following week and questions thereafter, and we didn't get final clarification on those HUD regulations until Wednesday, April 22nd. And then we opened up 2 business days thereafter. We all are sure empathetic to residents' concerns, but during that time, we arranged with nonprofits to deliver food and water to our elderly residents.
That doesn't cost you.
We didn't get
And that's all properties. We also made sure that when we were in our partial transition, asset managers and property managers were available through their cell phones by transferring those main lines to their actual cell phones to answer questions. As we transitioned back to opening up, we took the liberties in which HUD had allowed in its waivers. So our public housing residents were not required to pay rent if they could not pay rent between April 1st to July 31st. And in speaking with our Director of Finance, because we received subsidy for that, individuals who weren't able to pay their rent can enter into a repayment plan up to 40% of their income on a prorated basis. And that repayment plan can be as long as 12 months. I think that's very significant and definitely unprecedented than any other housing authority is doing across the nation. The next thing is for our affordable housing residents, because there's no federal subsidy for that, and we have to operate it similar to as a private property management firm. We are offering the same kind of repayment, but not as long, up to 6 months. It could be for those residents. And so I think right now we will continue to look what more we can do for our residents. And as Mr. John Johnson came up and spoke, we have communicated through letters to HCV participants, to the property owners, the HCV participants, those with Section 8 vouchers, are not obligated to pay rent unless they can until July 31st. And we've given that communication, and they take those letters to court, that we would ask the courts that they allow an agreement between the HCV participant and the property owner of a repayment plan of 6 months. As has been discussed in some parts aspects, the agency did receive some supplemental funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development through the CARES Act. If commissioners would go to their package and there was an insert of a colored Excel spreadsheet, I'd like to break that down. Obviously, we don't have budget numbers for these activities, but we will get those budget numbers to you as soon as staff completes that. And finance, Mr. Herron and I have the ability to go over those in a budget before we say go. So one of the things that we will be using the supplemental funding, $3.7 million, is to make sure that we are continuously procuring protective equipment for our employees. Our employees all receive KN95 or 9N95 masks. They receive protective gloves so that they can operate here. We also will be looking at distributing personal protective equipment to our residents. Obviously, it's a contract and procurement process. We can't just arbitrarily just charge that amount on the card and get it to the residents overnight. But if residents are patient, we are expeditiously moving that forward. One of the things also that we will be able to look at is supporting particularly those clients in our FSS program and those nonprofits that work with our clients in an FSS program, where they may have some troubles in funding and providing services. We will be able to evaluate and the team determine whether we can provide additional funding for them to provide services to our FSS clients. Another thing is, as residents have complained, unfortunately we were shut down. The HUD regulations allow for this supplemental money to pay for overtime. This overtime will be used at our public housing sites so that property managers and the maintenance folks can work over the weekends to catch up on routine work orders and also just be available. This will also be the same for our HCV department. And this is specifically tailored because HUD wants to be sure that obviously we can't see as many people as we would like to see on a daily basis, so we need to expand our service hours. And for us, as an agency that has on a 410 schedule, that means being open now on Friday and Saturday as much as we can within the budget authority that we have, and we'll get that to the commissioners. Another thing that we'll be able to do, as I said, is deliver goods and services and supplies and equipment. And if you see at the bottom of this sheet, a significant number of those activities fall within our supportive services department. And as a result of that, I decided to bring back or reactivate that supportive services department in the configuration that it was. And I brought back Ms. Tracy Torrance, who used to serve in that position, because we needed someone with the capabilities and experience of managing those type of relationships with our partners in the nonprofit, government agencies, and here at the agency to hit the ground running. It was just important that we do that, and I've had a good talk with her in coming back into this role, and I'm very comfortable that she will be able to lead this role for our agency. Also, we have to look at that this supplemental funding allows for us to provide for child care for our residents once they are able to return to work. We also are already in the process of purchasing hotspots for families. We identified 489 families already that have school-aged children that may or may not have internet access service, so that they can continue their education, whether school opens up or activities open up this summer or school opens up this fall. Ms. Tracy Torrance will be going out and doing outreach on that. Obviously, another thing we've done is we'll be increasing security, particularly at our elderly sites. It is right that unfortunately, just this region deals with homelessness. All of us are affected by that, where we live, where we work. And unfortunately, because there was no activity at these sites as a regular, the homeless folks encroached on these sites. And so we have budget funding to increase security at these properties all the way. Right now, I've just said until July 31st, and then we'll reevaluate that. But there will be increased security beyond the normal schedule that is usually at our properties, which is Thursday through Sunday. So that will be increased. And then also for those particular properties, and these are more like the properties in Commissioner Diaz's location, where laundry rooms are sometimes not available because of security reasons, that will make these laundry rooms available for the public housing side during those times, because staff will be available. I think that kind of concludes. Only thing that I just felt that we probably just didn't get in time is just a budget on how we're going to break that down. But because that would just be information and not a discussion aspect, and unless we hear objections from the board, we can come back for a special session on the budget approval breakdown of those expenditures.
All right, thank you, Mr. Williams. Are there comments or questions or any need for elaboration from Mr. Williams regarding his report or addressing the COVID? Yes, sir. Mr. Weekly.
Thank you so much. Mr. Williams, I really appreciate you breaking this down, because looking at this, I started with you yesterday on this chart. I had a lot of concerns about it because it wasn't specific enough for me. I thought that there was a lot of redundancy that was going on here. I initially felt like put something together just to give it to the board, and what you said makes a whole lot of sense. Because let me tell you something. And going out there over the last couple of months, talking to a lot of these residents, there are a lot of people out here who they didn't get it in the beginning when COVID-19 came about. And there was this misconception that this virus did not affect African Americans, right? Now that we see that these numbers, it's affecting disproportionate numbers, people are starting to understand, and Councilwoman Diaz, now we're starting to see very high numbers in the Latino community as well. And so I'm happy to hear the news that you really are working these dollars down. You and Mr. Herron, you really did it and put it in the hands of people that really need it. It's so important. I want to thank your staff for coming out into the neighborhoods with that made a whole lot of difference. One thing we're saying to us though, if Mr. Weekly, I just don't have money to buy gloves and a mask. I can feed my kids. And so for you all to be able to provide service to many of these residents, that's just be a blessing as we continue to fight it. You're the chairman of the health board. You see these numbers. You know what's happening in community recovery. It has to be a number one top priority. Looking at these numbers from our schools, these kids got let out of school way too early. So a lot of these kids are efficient, it's all outdoors. Some of these kids got Chromebooks, a lot of these kids did not get Chromebooks. Are we going to maybe see if there is any kind of funding as we work with these nonprofits that we could possibly provide some funding? You've got a lot of kids right now with nowhere to go. And with that, there's a lot of fun activities that's happening in our neighborhood. We got to make sure we do our part to provide resources to a lot of these kids. Now, one of the things that you said, Mr. Wiggins, you said that you're looking at taking some of these funds and going into many of our senior communities as well. Do you have adequate enough staff? Because these are some of our most vulnerable citizens who are living in dense communities. What's the plan? You guys have written up in the order list here. You have some specific plan. Is that something that we're going to see in the next week or so?
So, Mr. Commissioner Weekly, you was breaking up, so I just want to repeat your question and see if I got it clear. So the question was, does the agency have enough staff to go, particularly in our elderly and senior properties, to deliver the supportive services that I've outlined?
Yes, sir. Because in your report, you mentioned that there was some type of plan that was going to be presented, and I'm wondering, do we have enough adequate staff to be able to go in and provide these type of resources to these vulnerable communities? Yes, sir.
So the question is, no, we don't have enough adequate staff. However, one of the things I am encouraged with bringing Ms. Tracy Torrance back is that because of her deep connection with a lot of the community partners, that we'll be able to identify volunteers to assist us, particularly in distribution of the personal protective equipment, food supplies, and waters. So the question is no, but I will report back to you and the board if we have challenges in recruiting volunteers, sir.
And Mr. Chairman, let me ask this. Earlier, I heard someone say something to the effect of legal services. And I believe that we are going to need legal services. Is there a specific nonprofit like Legal Aid Services that we're partnered with? What nonprofit's going to be there to provide some assistance to many of these residents when they have to go back and talk about negotiated arrears?
Yeah,
so that's something that we're going to provide some funding as well.
Yeah, so in the letter that was communicated to all of our HCV participants, which is 11,996, they were informed that the Housing Authority will work closely with Nevada Legal Services to ensure that the negotiation of their arrears is fair and ensure that, and then also in the letter, it was very explicitly communicated to property owners that any errors in trying to work with the housing authority and trying to illegally evict tenants, their participation as landlords will be evaluated at the highest level of this agency for continued participation. And we also